Good day, everybody, and good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of From the Minister's Chair. But today I'll be in the ZJB's office, so I'm not sure it's from the Minister's Chair, but from ZJB's office. And last week I had promised I started updates on some of the projects that we were doing, and I didn't get to the port project. I did promise that I was going to give a full update on the port project, since it's one of the biggest projects, if not the biggest projects that's on the agenda to be completed. So I was thought that it was prudent to do a separate interview that deals with the port project as a separate thing. What's going to happen going forward, that after I do this, there's the port manager, project manager would also come on with his team and to also give an update to the public. There will be public consultancy, there will be town hall meetings, there will be a lot of information going out as the project gets closer and closer to being implemented. But before I begin, we went through the storm a couple of nights ago, and I have to start by congratulating the PWD crew and the MUL crew. Because when you came out the night, when you were traveling on the road and see all the landslides and all the various things that were happening, you were trying to figure out what would happen the next morning. By 12 o'clock the next day, unless you knew what had occurred, you would not have even known that something happened. The roads were cleared, a lot of the bridges were already done. Apart from certain spots in St. Peter's by Cheap End, most of the roads were cleared. You could have traversed the country. All in front of MSL had those issues were cleared. So I know I congratulated the PWD crew before on the cleaning of the road itself, and the MUL crew assisted them. But I also must thank them, and I think the country also needs to thank them for the great work that they have done in making sure that after the storm that everything is back in place. So with that, I guess I could move on to the discussion of the port. And to do that, I've roped in Miss Fiona Smith here to try and ask me some of the questions and some of the concerns that she's been getting about the port project, because it has been a long time since something has been said about it. I know she has some questions that she wants to ask. I'll try to answer some. The ones that I can't answer, I guess the project manager will come on a later date and provide some clarity on those.
All right, so good afternoon to our listeners and our viewers. Dr. the Honorable Samuel Joseph, good afternoon to you. And let me join you in commending the Public Works Department and all the other teams who are involved in the cleanup exercise following the intense rainfall on Monday night. But yes, we're here to discuss the Montserrat Port Development Project. And I think it's important for us to start first with you providing an overview of that project for those who may not be too familiar with the actual details of the project itself.
The project started, if you go to the history of it, in 2015, the then Prime Minister David Cameron, he came to the Caribbean, and in Jamaica, he announced that he was going to give £300 million to the Caribbean region for development of infrastructure projects, ports, roads, and things along that line. And the money was placed in the Central Caribbean Development Bank, the CDB, who would manage the project. There was now a formula used. There were 8 countries that were eligible to receive that money. A formula was used to calculate how much money they can get. Montserrat was one of those countries, and we received about £14 million. The government of Montserrat now had the leeway to decide what they wanted to do with the money. It wasn't dictated to you. You made a choice of what project you wanted. The government at that time decided that Montserrat wanted a port, and they agreed that they were going to do a port project. So in November of 2017, the formal grant to Montserrat was given, that we got £14.4 million to proceed with the port project. So that continued. You fast forward, in 2019, so we're going to skip 2 years. In 2019, you had a situation now, a design was done and everything was proceeding. A company, Stantec, was now brought in to say, what's the cost of this project that you have on paper? It then came out that the cost of the project was around 200 and something million EC dollars, which is way over the amount of money that was allocated. Granted, we also got about 7 million euro added from the EU funds to that project, but that's nowhere close to the 200 and something million dollars that would have been needed to complete the project. So a decision was made. We still want the project, so let's, in some sense, can we do it on a smaller scale? Can we redesign it to fit into the smaller scale? So the size of the project went from the 200 meters down to the current size of 130 meters, and that's what we're currently now working on for a project the size of 130 meters. Remembering that there are certain requirements on the project itself. It must fulfill certain things in boats that must come. It must have a certain economic requirement, so you must fulfill all of those. So that's where we are now. We now have a set of money. We now have a design. So it's now to proceed from there now to the actual tendering and bidding to see what happens.
Right. For persons like myself who like to visualize things as people speak about them, when you say 130 meters, what does that mean in terms of the capacity of a ship that can be accommodated at the port?
The current cruise ships that come would fit comfortably, and you'll also get some of the medium-sized one. You won't be able to get some of the huge cruise ships. And even though the ships themselves are longer than the 130 meters and they could protrude out at the end, there's something called a dolphin that you can put out inside of the sea to basically tie on that other portion of the boat into the sea to keep it stable. So you would be able to get bigger cruise ships. And in terms of our marketing and tourism strategy, with Montserrat is not or does not currently have the capacity to take these huge cruise ships anyway.
Okay.
We're always targeting these mid-level type cruise ships to come to the island as part of our tourism strategy. A cruise ship coming here with 5,000 people cannot be absorbed into Montserrat. I don't think it's something that the people would want anyway.
Right, right. And I think in an earlier discussion earlier this year with the project manager, he did indicate that it's a phase-by-phase approach that's being taken.
Because what's envisioned and what we hope to do is after you finish this part, that you construct it in such a way that if in the future it needs to be extended, that extension can be done. You just have to ensure that the part that we built now do fit into the current budget. And if we require to find extra monies, that decisions are made now, how we are going to obtain these monies to make sure that the project that we actually implement does what it's supposed to do. Because as I pointed out numerous times, it makes no sense just to build a port for building a port's sake. You're building a port to achieve very specific objectives and have to always ensure that those objectives are met.
Right. Now, earlier this year as well, I think around February, the project advanced to the procurement process phase where contractors were being invited to pre-qualify for the design-build contract. Has this pre-qualification process been completed?
That has been completed, because how it works is that you're asking people that build ports, the contractors, to say that you're interested in this project. So you're not really bidding at this time, you're just saying, I'll be interested in a project like that. You submit your documents, and then CDB went through the list, and it basically eliminated down to 5. Okay. So you're now down to 5, what you call pre-qualifiers, bidders. That these are the 5 people that the actual tender document would go to, and these are the ones that we allowed to bid on the project. So there was a set of requirements that they had to fulfill, and CDB had to ensure to themselves that these people can actually build the port, they actually have the capability of doing it. And whatever the technical questions are, that's not important, but the point is that we're now down to 5 pre-selected contractors that the bids would go out to.
Right, so you said the bids will go out too, so when will that actually happen?
The timeline that we're working on is sometime in December. There's some final stuff that needs to be complete now, like some finalize on some stuff on the environmental studies, finalize on stuff on the social impact of the port, on what's going to happen in the country and on the bay side, and who's going to be affected and how they're going to be dealt with. Those are in the process of being completed at the end of November. Then one now has to wait from, I don't know it's permission, but basically the permission from CDB to proceed into the bidding phase, and we expect that to take place in December, that those formal procurement documents go out in December. Right,
so if the documents are to actually go out in December, when do we anticipate the selection
the selection, according to the timeline, that last timeline we have will be in March.
So it would be March of 2021.
Yeah, in 2020. March of 2021.
Yes.
March of 2021, you would know who's doing the contract, with the hope that by June of 2021, actual construction starts.
Okay.
Mid next year is the deadline that we're working on. The construction should start by then.
Right, and we're saying it's 5 companies that would have met the pre-qualification requirements, and those 5 companies would now be expected to bid on the project in December. Hopefully one of the 5 will be selected in March, and then in June, construction. That's right. The timeline.
That's the timeline. And remember, as you pointed out, it's a design and build. So although we have a concept of how you want it to look, the company is expected to design the entire project. So when they design it, you will still have to come back to the public to say this is what it looks like, having discussions, and that should take, we're hoping, no less than the 3 months so that you could start construction in June.
Right, so the public will be consulted on the design
At
from what
all
I'm getting
phases.
at all phases. All right, okay, that's good to hear. Now, obviously this year we had COVID-19 surprising us in March. You surprising us, in inverted commas, but we did have COVID-19. Did that in any way cause a delay in the port project or any other factors?
It caused a delay because we were hoping that the project would have started this year.
Yeah.
But there are certain components of the project that had to be done in terms of things like some geotechnical studies, some of the environmental studies, and because of travel restrictions and countries were shut down. Montserrat itself was shut down. Some of the source countries that you were getting these people on were shut down and they could not travel. Then even after you opened back up, you had the issues of to travel, there were quarantine restrictions that had to come in for 2 weeks and we weren't sure what countries were going to do. And because of some of these restrictions, some of the bidders that want to do things would have driven up the cost. In other words, they would have expected, if I'm going to come into your country and I have to spend 2 weeks, you have to pay for my hotel and my other things. Not only that, when I go back, and when I go back to my country, they're asking me to quarantine again for 2 weeks. So those costs started to get reflected in some of the bids that you're receiving for some of the works that were going forward. So it did push back the timeline. There was an EU timeline of June, and because of COVID, we got an extension to next year. So certain things did get pushed back, but there's a new timeline that we're working with, as I said, that to get the environmental and social stuff done in November, get the bids out in December, evaluate by March, and start construction in June.
Right, so you mentioned there an environmental and social impact assessment that should be done. Tell us a bit more about that. When should it start? I think you said December. Is it that both of them will start at the same time?
There was already a social impact study was already done, and an environmental study was already done. Because if you're going to build a port, remember you have coral reefs, you have fishes, you have the bat cave, and certain other issues that were done. But as I pointed out at the beginning, a design was done, the design was changed to a new one. So which means there's certain other phases of that have to be relooked at. If you change the direction of the port, the angle of the port, where it's going to go, it's going to affect the corals in a different kind of way. Maybe because it's smaller, it doesn't have a same impact on the bat cave and on the environment around there. So they have to do another study on that. The funders are very concerned about the social impact. If you do a project, you're doing a project for people, let's put it that way. You're not doing a project just for the infrastructure itself, you're doing a project for people. So if you're going to do a port, it's going to affect the fishermen, it's going to affect the people that go to the beach there for recreational purposes, it's going to affect the shops and other things that are around that area. And you would like to minimize that as much as possible. Everybody understands you want the development, but development comes with certain disruptions. But you need to take steps to make these disruptions as less as possible. Mitigating factors need to be taken into account. So there's some final stuff that the financiers would like to see completed before they give the go-ahead. A consultant has already been engaged, so work has already begun to finalize that social part and the environmental part, and we expect that to be completed close to the end of this month, beginning of next month. That should be completed and submitted to CDB and these other financiers, and one would hope that they are satisfied that we have put enough mitigating factors in place so that when the project goes forward, you don't have as much complaints as would come anyway.
Right. Okay. So what I'm getting from you, the financiers require that these things be done before the project advances.
Before it advances, they're not going to allow it to advance until they've convinced themselves that we have taken every step that we can possibly do to protect the environment and to protect the social impact that it's going to have on the community.
And they have to also be satisfied that the mitigation measures that you put in place are suitable.
Are suitable. And they're going to check the documents that we submit, and they're currently doing that for the previous one. They wanted some new stuff, which is what's happening now.
Okay.
That new stuff is now taking place.
New stuff. What is the new, when you say stuff?
Remember, I said we submitted those documents before.
Yeah.
Certain questions will come back, the design had changed, and certain other things changed, so they're asking other questions. So we now have to convince them that we have taken all of this into consideration.
Right.
For example, the fishermen will be affected. You need to come in, how will you deal with the fact that when you build the port, the fishermen will have to move, what are you putting in place so that their livelihood continues? You have to convince them that we have taken all of that into consideration. So there were meetings that took place with the fishermen, and those meetings are continuous. And also remember, during the project, you still have to monitor the coral reefs.
Right.
You still have to monitor the bat caves. You know, something you do at the beginning and something at the end is something that has to take place continuously as the project goes along.
Okay, okay. So in terms of persons who are now listening and hearing that there's a change, the design change, can you specify exactly from which point? Because I know up to February when we spoke with the project manager, he would have outlined a particular design. Is that design still the one going forward?
See, that's very dangerous, not the right word. It's very dangerous to put out pictures.
Okay.
Because the project is a design and build.
Right, okay.
You expect the contractor to come with the final design. So you may have a concept of how you want it to look. Or you think along this line is what you're looking at. But in the end, it's a design and build. So the person that wins the bid is expected to come up with the final design and the final look. What you can't do is to, because you don't have a certain amount of money, you must have an idea in your head what's the length of a port that can fit into that money. So originally we were looking at something around 200 meters, the government of Montserrat as a whole, not just administration, but when I say government of Montserrat, I mean whichever administration was looking at a project of 200 meters. It then came out that it kind of be very difficult to get that to fit within your budget.
Right.
So you're basically asking, can you now design something for us that's 130 meters that would fulfill the same requirements? So that's basically where we are now when I said that something has been changed.
Okay, all right. Thanks for clarifying that. So in terms of the social and environmental impact assessment, who will be responsible for carrying out these assessments? And how will they be done? Is it that they'll be doing interviews? What is the approach that will be taken?
I don't want to go into technical detail. That because I said the project manager will come, but they have hired a consultant to do that work. That person is currently has currently started in discussions to start, and the exact format of how they do it, they would come on and they would explain that. So I don't really want to get into how they're going to do it. But clearly they're going to have interviews, they're going to have town hall meetings, they're going to have calling things on ZJB and things like that. Right.
So for the remainder of the year, persons can expect to hear from persons involved in the port project a bit more. Maybe persons in the Casby, Little Bay area will be consulted and contacted to speak about the impact.
This is the beginning of it, but going forward, from now on, there'll be a lot more stuff that you'll be hearing about the project, both from the government itself and this administration, and also from the implementation phase with the project managers and his team. We'll be more engaged with the public, because the project is now at a stage where we are getting ready to start, and we have to make sure that everybody is on board with what we are doing.
Right,
it's a huge project.
And you did say June 2021 is when we expect construction to start, and that will be, I mean, a major milestone for us on Montserrat. I know persons are actually looking forward to that stage, because in our minds, although we hear about this project, it hasn't truly started until we see the ground.
Until something, groundbreaking. And
yes.
Sea breaking. Until something happens in the water. People are not going to think that something is happening.
So, I mean, June is not a far time away, so we look forward to that.
Just around the corner.
But you did speak about the finances for the project, 21.4. I think you mentioned 14 million from CDB and other funds. Do you want to explain the financing part so that persons are clear on how the 21.4 million pounds for the project came about?
Well, I said from the UKCIF funds, which is the infrastructure fund that the then Prime Minister David Cameron set up, Montserrat got about 14.4 million pounds. It was already known from that time that money would not have been adequate.
Right.
We also get something called European Development Funds. 7 million pounds from that was taken and added to the project, which took you to the 21 point something million.
Okay.
You know, when you go to 10, you're going to get back a number to see what that true number is. So we, as the government, we'd have to have if we come into that number, it would be nice. If it doesn't, then the government would have to find other additional sources of funding to make sure that we get the project to the stage that we want it to be. But we have to, until you get back the bids from the contractors, you may guess where you think that number will be. And you may have a fair idea what it would be, but until you get back those bids, you don't know the true number. But currently, it will be financed through the UKCIF funds and through EU funds.
Right, and the financiers, they are, can you give us an indication as to their level of openness for the possibility that we may need to have more funds injected into the project?
Well, the EU funds are set. The only other ones that will have some flexibility is on the UK side. We have had discussions with them. We have raised the possibility that maybe we may want something. Depends on how we come back. We may have to have some conversation concerning the funding and what we would like to achieve. So that conversation has been open already, but again, it's going to be very difficult to. You cannot. How are you asking for money, for more money, and don't know how much money that you need?
Right.
So you could alert you that we are looking at this project and we like to do it in the proper way. And we know the situation with the airport, you don't end up with a situation where you build something just because you have that. So you have to put that out there.
Right.
We would like these functions. This is what the design and build came back with to give us this.
Right.
This is the cost that comes to it. This is the amount of money we have. Maybe there's a difference. Let's have a discussion about the difference to ensure that wherever we build, it's not just because we have the money and we need to build something, so we just go out and build it.
Right.
It may be nice to do politically because you can say you build something, but in the future generations, somebody's going to look back and ask, why did you build that?
That's a valid point. So, and I'm actually glad that you mentioned that the conversation has started with them, so they know that there is a possibility that the design build contractor may come back with a higher price.
Number than what we have.
Right, and hopefully they're receptive. I mean, you can't say at this point yet if they are, but the conversation has started.
Conversation has started.
All right. Dr. Sami, any final updates on the project that we have not yet covered? I mean, we know that based on what you said, the social and environmental impact assessments are ongoing. They started this month or will be starting by the end of the month?
Not
clarify for me.
They've started.
They've started.
And we're hoping to get them finished by the end of this month.
This month or December, I thought?
Well, the bids have to go out in December.
In December,
so they have to be completed, submitted to CDB and get back responses.
Okay.
So we're trying to meet the December timeline.
Right.
There's you have a short window.
We have a short window.
In which you can complete those addendums.
Okay. And for those who are just joining, before you give your final comments, just recap for us the timeline as to what we're looking at from here on until we break ground.
There's a social impact study that, not a full study, so when I say social impact study, don't get the idea that nothing was done, but there's certain parts that still have to be done that was requested. There's certain parts of the environmental study that, some extra parts that has to be done. Those are expected to be finished in November. There's a geotechnical study that we're hoping to complete, basically to see what's under the ground, to get that complete by December. December now that will be submitted to the financiers, basically CDB and the EU. They agree that everything is fine. They give permission now to go out to bid to those 5 bidders. So in December, the tender documents go out. You expect to give them 3 months to come back with a reply. Get those in March. The team will now, the procurement teams will now go through those tender documents to see which company think best can deliver this project for Montserrat. A decision is made and the contract awarded. And you're hoping that works can start in June.
And hope is the operative word here because we know that we have to manage expectations. So we're aiming for June, but we know that.
Subject to COVID and other things that you have no control over. And we have to keep on have that thing in mind when we say these things because the world is going through a second phase of COVID right now. Certain countries have shut down. We know that parts of the UK have shut down. We're not sure what's going to happen in America because the cases are also going up. It depends where those bidders are coming from and where the workers are coming from. So all of these must be taken into consideration when you talk about these things. You can plan, you can have everything in place, but we as human beings are not in control of everything. We can just do our part and I hope that everything works out. It will work out though. We will have the port.
All right, absolutely. So your final comments at this point?
It's just that I would like the public to keep following what's happening because I don't know. They say it's a Montserrat issue, but I don't think it's a Montserrat issue. It's a general issue. These things come up for discussions. People call in and say, "Oh, they weren't consulted. Nobody told us about it. We don't know what happened. Are you going to do things and not tell nobody?" And all of these kind of conversations. When situations arise, when you have the opportunity to have your say, to say how things are going, and when the project managers and his team start going around getting comments, I would like people to participate. This is a huge project. It's going to have implications on our Little Bay area. It's going to have implications on the master plan that was there for Little Bay. It's going to have implications for tourism, for manufacturing, and all these other things. Implications for the entire Montserrat. We have to start participating in our own development and not just think, oh, is the government going to do this and whatever they do. Ask questions, make changes when the design comes. ask questions, make changes. Remember that not every comment that you make can be taken on board. Some of it may make sense, some of it might not make no sense, some of it might make sense, but you don't have the money to do it. Some of it will have to make compromises because of various things with environment, social, financing. But let us be part of our own development, and let us be part of this project, and let us all, I don't know. That is to be said, and I keep repeating it, but it's still that I find that keeps occurring, that we do not take part in our development decisions, and then when they take them, we complain that we weren't a participant. And I've made an effort to this program and all my other programs to try to keep people up to date with what the ministry is doing, with the idea that if you're transparent and people know what's going on, they'll feel part of the process, and we can, all of us, come together, can build this country into how we want it to be.
Dr. Sammy, Dr. the Honorable Samuel Joseph, that's a valid point and solid point to end on. So thank you so much for inviting me to the Minister's Chair today.
Thank you.
All right.
And thank for the audience for tuning in again.
All right, thanks. Good.
Keeping Montserrat. This is 95.5, 88.3 FM, ZJB.